Everyone agrees that it began with the bells. On an ordinary spring morning, the cathedral's bronze chimes rang at 9:06 a.m. as always. Then, 37 seconds later, every clock in the city of Hesselum slid back to Phi 9. Devoted commuters reboarded the same tram they had already ridden. Professors repeated the first lines of lectures that had just concluded, and the bells pealed their hourly anthem a second time. People laughed about faulty wiring. Mechanics pried open panels. Reporters filled airtime with speculation. Yet the next day, the step backward arrived again. Only this time, it was exactly 1 minute and 0 seconds, arriving at 12:01 a.m. and delivering everyone neatly to the final minute of the previous day. It was precise, patient, and, as would soon become clear, unstoppable. Within a month, the pattern was undeniable. The city lost 60 seconds of its future every day. Clocks were useless after midnight. Officials tried to reset them, but their hands twitched backward all on their own. Smartphones forgot the difference between yesterday and today. An invisible thumb kept dragging their digital time bars in reverse. Outside, broadcasts still moved forward, yet inside Hesselum, the air itself seemed to list toward the past, like a ship taking on water. The scientists called it a retrograde bleed, the theologians a judgment, and the poets, always eager to own calamity, christened it the slow unraveling. But definitions were powerless against the deeper surprise. The effect was not limited to clocks. The city's people, caught in the same invisible tide, were regressing too. At first, no one noticed that they looked fractionally fresher in the mirror. Then barbers realized hair was shortening overnight instead of growing. Wrinkles thinned. Scar tissue softened. After 6 months, infants who had entered the world after the bells rang began drifting back toward the womb, though their mothers, mercifully, did not split open, but instead carried them phantom-light, as if the babies were inside-out dreams, ready to vanish into non-being. A council convened in the old Parliament chamber, architects, doctors, physicists, and a pair of magi whom no one had considered anything but stage illusionists until that week. They tested the borders. Hesselum's inner ring wall was as ancient as its iron mines. Suddenly it was more than ornament. The reversal stopped there like an obedient dog. One step outside the gate, and time snapped forward again. Step back, and it rewound. No global catastrophe, just an isolated loop eating away at 60 seconds of future each day. The rest of the world watched on satellite feeds and offered sympathy, the way one consoles a neighbor whose basement floods. It is terrible. Thank heaven the waterline ends at our fence. I tell this from inside, though I do not know for certain which version of me you will receive. My name is Leona Copeland. At the start, I was 42. I teach comparative history at the Royal College, or taught before the syllabus began erasing its own chapters. I keep daily notes with pens I store in a lead-lined box that sits in a refrigerated vault. Precautions recommended by the Magi to shield ink from temporal backwash. Every midnight I record what I remember, what seems stable and what has slipped. If you read this outside the walls, remember that for me, everything described occurred, is occurring, and will occur again in reverse until we are nothing but prologues. The first real panic arose not from biology, but from contracts. Banks attempted interest calculations on loans that no longer matured. Courts puzzled over marriages. If years rolled backward, would wedding vows annul themselves, and at which moment? Lawyers argued that a couple would pre-divorce before they pre-married, piercing causality like a skewer through fruit. Those arguments quickly grew absurd, and soon irrelevant, because numbers on ledgers were supplanted by more immediate terrors. 8 months in, the earliest victims, elderly residents already fragile, found themselves drifting into adolescence. Arthritic joints restored flexibility, even as memories evaporated. One man woke to discover his late wife alive beside him, only to realize she was several weeks shy of recognizing him. By nightfall, she looked at him with the polite confusion one reserves for kind strangers. My own parents, living across town, regressed from retirees to middle-aged companions sharing my apartment, while their own house unpurchased itself. They spent evenings trying to remember whether the teal couch had always been there, or was an omen of impending deletion. We installed voice recorders to remind them that tomorrow they would be younger again. Through it all, the city government tried to maintain ceremony. Public service announcements assured us we would innovate our way into a mutual horizon, although horizons, by definition, recede as you approach. The mayor ordered university physicists to build a barrier, something like the magnetic fields that cloak Earth from solar wind. They produced a lattice of superconductive pylons around the inner wall, humming with enough power to keep Hesselum bright through winter. At midnight, the hum faltered for 2 seconds. The pylons spat sparks, and the city slipped back its daily minute with a shrug so casual it felt cruel. Nothing had changed except that, in the experiment's violent pulse, more than 1,000 streetlights burst simultaneously, plunging night travelers into darkness literally and figuratively. By the end of the first year, we had lost 365 minutes, just over 6 hours. A whole quarter of a day was missing from what lay ahead, and it warped everything like heat haze. Newspapers printed morning editions first and delivered supper updates at dawn. Restaurants rewrote menus in reverse order. Dessert trays arrived before coffee, which arrived before appetizers. Chefs joked it was a new tasting journey, but the laughter trailed off as our stomachs responded absurdly. Digestion rewound. The body expelled waste as meals reverted into raw ingredients. Physicians developed dietary guidelines that resembled stage directions. Chew the memory of food. Do not swallow. The city smelled of mint tea, white bread, and antiseptic wind. I would have surrendered to despair, if not for my students. The college decided to condense every degree into a single accelerated term before time snatched more future. We packed semester's knowledge into weeks, weeks into days. In those compressed rooms, I saw minds blaze brighter, even as their owners technically decayed toward infancy. One afternoon, when the clocks clicked us backward yet again, a young mathematician named Atia raised her hand. "Professor?" she asked. "If we are moving at negative 60 seconds per 24 hours, then relative to the rest of the world, we experience time at 23:59 Gauss. That's 99.93% standard speed. So the deeper horror is not the minutes, but the perspective. We watch ourselves vanish almost in real time." Perspective. A concept so common I'd forgotten it could wound. Another day, a literature cohort insisted on rereading endings first, forging new appreciation for beginnings they would soon lose. "Any story we love will eventually retreat into a blank page," claimed a poet called Erasmus. "So let us memorize every line before it unwrites itself." They staged Shakespeare backward, closing with the lovers alive and parted, not yet ruined. Applause spilled outside until midnight vacuumed its silence. Meanwhile, the city's architecture performed its own theater. Scaffolding sprouted overnight where rain had earlier gouged stone. Mosaics regained missing tesserae. Skyscrapers shortened by centimeters, shedding their latest floors like shrugged jackets. The shift was not uniform. Renovation projects undone first, then older layers in order of construction. The skyline resembled an onion unpeeling itself to a younger bulb. Whole neighborhoods prepared for the day their foundations would disincarnate. People camped near the east wall with backpacks,
hoping to step across the border the instant their street threatened to unexist. Escape became a philosophical puzzle. Step outside, and you re-enter forward time, but only the version of you who steps that instant. Each minute you wait, a younger you crosses. Parents fought over what to do with children already receding toward the womb. If they fled, would infants age forward again and tear tissue anew? Many gambled anyway, barricading strollers into caravans that rolled through the gates at dawn. Observers said infants hurled into ordinary time, resumed normal growth, but some bore scars, twin lines on their backs where temporal tension had snapped them like kite strings. I wanted to leave many nights, but my parents, growing brisk and cheerful as their joints restored, refused. "We already marched this path once," my mother said, stroking hair that had darkened to a shade I remembered from childhood photographs. "Let's see if we get it right or in reverse." And there was Jonas, my neighbor, originally 10 years old, who had become my ward after the bells. He kept a scrapbook of soccer stickers. Each week, he brought me a page where yesterday's scoring legends had peeled away, leaving younger versions of themselves in kits from rookie seasons. Jonas laughed about it. "They're getting better at their footwork again." It felt obscene to carry him outside and surrender him to a future he barely knew. So I stayed. Year 2 carved 12 hours from us. By then, the global press lost appetite. The story was repetitive, the photographs uncanny, but predictable. Aid convoys still delivered supplies through the wall, dropping crates inside a buffer zone. Our stores remained fresh because produce delivered today arrived to us tomorrow slightly greener, younger. Only once did an external diplomat step through, a senator from the Federated Coast who insisted on negotiating temporal asylum protocol. He shook our mayor's hand, took one breath, and collapsed as his lungs convulsed. Medical personnel shoved him back outside, and he recovered, but refused ever to repeat the experiment. Our city became ghost theater, watched but untouched. On the day we lost 15 hours, people said the sky changed shade, like dusk lingering across noon. Perhaps a trick of perception. No instruments inside Hesselum were trustworthy anymore. I measured the length of my shadow. It seemed longer, as though the sun itself was aging backward for us. Jonas, now 8 again, declared he could run faster than yesterday's version of himself. He timed sprints with a stopwatch that clicked backward. Results always read 0. Around this milestone, the council revealed a discovery. Hidden in weather records, they found evidence that Hesselum had experienced minor backward lurches for decades. Seconds stolen here and there, too subtle to notice. The Bells incident only magnified an old leak, they concluded. If the bleed started years ago, then perhaps our future had always been frayed, explaining why Hesselum had never thrived quite as expected. The revelation felt hollow. Blame the past all you wish, the present still unspools. My historian's instinct kept me amid the ruins, cataloging vanishing details, a fresco's brushstroke before it reverted into raw pigment, a street vendor's recipe before her cart unwelded. I feared losing not just my life, but evidence it ever happened. The vault under the college library became memory's ark. Notebooks sealed in vacuum bags, digital drives inside Faraday cages. But already we encountered paradox. Files saved yesterday were older than the computers that read them. Code compiled in a language invented after the Bells no longer executed. The compiler itself erased functions that now technically had not been written. One cold evening, I sat by Jonas's bed. I told him bedtime stories many times, yet each night he wanted them simpler, as his mind regressed. Across the hall, my parents danced to music from their youth. They had grown positively radiant, though I saw grief in their eyes when they looked at me, for I was slipping the other way. Younger, yes, but also more orphaned each day. Something in me snapped, not with anger but clarity. We could not store memory against the tide. We had to bend its direction. I sought the Magi. The stage illusionists turned consultants. Their workshop occupied an old theater, whose curtains unfurled thicker nightly. The building was working its way back to velvet grandeur. The brothers, Alain and Georg, greeted me from opposite sides of a table, scattered with chronometers, sand glasses, and coils of copper wire. They had developed a device they called a counter-second. Inspired by the pylon's failure, they opted not to block flow, but to splice it. Picture two ropes twisted opposite directions. At the junction, tension neutralizes. Their device collected forward seconds from outside and braided them with our backward minutes, hoping to create a node of stillness where time equaled 0. Could I test it? I volunteered instantly. We installed the machine atop the City Hall tower, where the bells had first misrung. Midnight approached. The city underneath glittered, a bright fossil already half dug from the strata of days. Georg adjusted dials. Alain read an incantation that was half equation, half prayer. The device, a cage of gyroscopes spinning opposite ways, began to purr. I stood in its center, clutching my lead-lined journal like a holy book. The bells struck their inverted hour. I felt a tug, as if my ribs briefly chained to two horses galloping apart. I tasted copper. Then, silence, thicker than walls, surrounding me like water. Below, the city lights flickered backward that familiar 1 minute. But atop the tower, nothing moved. My watch neither advanced nor retreated. The second hand hovered as though embarrassed. Alain whispered, "It works." He sounded terrified of his own success. For 60 seconds of external time, an eternity of 0, I occupied a bubble where nothing aged, unaged, or possessed direction. Thoughts formed slower, uncoiled, rearranged. I remembered childhood, then the moment before birth, then something like possibility without shape. When the device wound down, the rope of time reasserted. The city's next backward step yanked me, yet I landed precisely where I began. No younger, no older. A triumph? Barely. The Magi calculated that to bring Hesselum to a halt, they'd need thousands of such cages across the walls, synchronized with atomic precision and colossal power far beyond our dwindling grids. Even if they succeeded, we would not move forward. We would simply freeze. Outside, nations would still edge centuries ahead, while we remained museum pieces stuck at negative infinity. Back home, I found Jonas 6 years old, clutching his scrapbook like a shield. "Soon I'll be small," he whispered. "Will I fit in my shoes?" I held him so tightly he squealed. In the kitchen, my parents debated which of them should propose. Apparently, tomorrow their engagement unhappened. The city had become a masquerade, where everyone revisited the mask before the face. I wrote frantic notes that night, pen tearing paper. The only escape worth pursuing, I decided, was storytelling itself. If the minutes pulverized matter, but not narrative, lodges outside them, somewhere inside you, dear reader, then perhaps memory survives. That is why I address this to whoever stands beyond the walls, not as plea for rescue. Interventions fail. Instead, I send evidence, hoping words carry momentum no clock can subtract. Each sentence is a shard chipped from our splintering present, smuggled across the threshold by anyone brave enough to read. Months passed. The council disbanded. Libraries emptied as pages faded blank.
The skyline shortened until cranes no longer reached their own previous heights. My father became 30, 25, then the man who first kissed my mother. She giggled like a teenager at his jokes. One morning, they stood on the threshold of my apartment, backpacks ready. "We want to see the world forward again," they said. For them, the scales balanced. They were still old enough to survive the crossing, yet young enough to carry hope. I escorted them to the gate. They stepped through and gasped as air thickened, weighty with days, then rushed into whatever future remained. Jonas could no longer read. He traced letters backward with his finger, brow furrowed in confusion. I realized soon I would cradle a toddler, then an infant. The city's hospitals had prepared special wards for negative-age children, rooms lined with incubators sized down to thimbles. Eventually, the children would vanish into nothing, each a final sigh of chronology. I sat in my study, lights dimming as the grid unwove, and contemplated the math. At 60 seconds per day, Hesselum would erase itself entirely in about 43,000 years. Long past our biological reversal point. Our bodies would wink out after 25 uncomfortable years. Beyond that, only stones regressing to sediment, metal to ore, color to element, until even the valley that once hosted us became a basin of possibility. What sparked next was small yet impossible. I began dreaming forward. In those dreams, I saw a city rebuilding itself in accelerando, citizens surging through adolescence into adulthood. Jonas older than me, leading research into time fabrics. We wore badges shaped like bells that rang harmonies instead of repeating alarms. Waking, the dreams stayed vivid, as if birthed by somewhere that refused backward rule. At first, I dismissed them as longing. But then I noticed a detail. In each dream, I held a notebook which I had recently mailed across the wall. And there, on its final page, was a sentence I had not written yet. "The story is the rope we climb. This message, the one you read, is that notebook. Magi claim even the smallest leak goes both directions. If minutes escape, maybe stories can seep in. Maybe your eyes upon these words generate new seconds, tiny pulses of forward time that slip through cracks and stick like morning dew upon our sidewalks. If enough people read, the sum might equal 60, might hold one full minute in place, then another. Perhaps we could tread water inside your attention until rescue of a stranger type arrives. That, then, is my final hypothesis. Memory shared becomes future regained. Outside Hesselum, your clocks tick unaffected. You kiss your children before school, squint at screens that light your commutes, plan birthdays impossible for us. We do not ask that you halt your bright momentum. Only that, now and again, you think of the city whose bells rang twice, whose skyline coiled inward like shavings, whose people walk backward through their own births, clutching tails that refuse erasure. Hold us in present tense, even if just a minute. While you do, we advance with you, tethered by the fragile physics of empathy. I've nearly finished my words. Jonas, 4 years old, naps across my lap, breath sweet with undone teeth. When he wakes, I will tell him our latest bedtime story, of a place beyond the gate where seasons still dare to bloom, where people read a message carried on the shoulders of silence, and where each reader lends a heartbeat we can borrow. If he laughs, I'll know a new second has landed. Midnight looms. The bells below gather breath for their backward toll. Yet tonight, as they ring, I will picture you, whoever you are, pausing to listen with us. And perhaps, in that shared listening, we will steal 1 minute back, hold it like a candle cupped against wind, and glimpse ahead not at ruins, but at the faint, bright outline of another tomorrow.